All right, well, welcome everybody. Appreciate you joining. I'll make sure to check back in here a little bit later, make sure that I have any of the questions that you may have along the way answered as we go through things. I'm here to talk about the struggles of open source leadership. I'm trying to share some lessons learned that I've encountered through my time working in open source projects leadership. For those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Mitchell Sellers. I'm the CEO of Iowa Computer Gurus Incorporated. We're a software consulting firm based out of the Des Moines, Iowa area, working with Microsoft technologies for customers all over the world. But on the open source side of things, I am most notably known as the technology leader for the DNN Platform, which is a .NET-based content management system that's a member of the .NET Foundation. I also have a number of other open source projects that I am maintainer on. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Also a Microsoft MVP, DNN MVP, ASP Insider. My contact information is here. I would encourage you that if you have any questions along the way, especially if you're undertaking some of your initial visits into open source or anything like that, reach out anytime. I'm really willing to share things that we've learned from managing the .NET Nuke project, the other projects that I'm a part of, or even just being part of the .NET Foundation itself, because some of that is even a little bit hard to navigate throughout all of the process. So feel free to reach out at any time with any questions that you might have. Always willing to help share from the experiences that I've had so that others don't necessarily have to go through as many hard knocks as what I've done. So give you a little bit of an idea of the way that we're going to run through things today. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my experience just so that you can understand where I'm coming from, what I've experienced, what I haven't experienced, and talk about a lot of the things that we've put in place to handle some of those struggles, handle some of those things that we have been working with as part of our project. We'll talk a little bit about some other things that are often overlooked, such as security and interpersonal communication. And then we'll talk a little bit at the very end here about some questions and things that I had solicited from others via Twitter prior to this, and then as well as any of you that are attending here today might have some questions along the way. We'll make sure to get those answered. So as I mentioned, I am the technology group leader for the .NET Nuke platform or DNN Platform project. The project itself is more than 15 years old, started back with .NET Framework 1.0, Visual Basic. Currently today, it requires .NET Framework 4.7.2 and utilizes C#. The installation base that we have, we believe as of right now, it's still to be 500,000 to 700,000 active installations. So we have a really large install base itself. The project then as well is around 2 million lines of code. And then we also see around 14,000 to 15,000 code files. And we're receiving and processing somewhere around 40 to 50 pull requests in a given month. So our activity levels are pretty good for a large project, but we do have a very large base. If we look at the installation base versus contributions, right, it's a fairly small number. And I think this is something that fundamentally is really important for everybody to understand, is that we really do see a village being supported by a couple of people in the background. With that being said, we have a leadership team for the DNN Platform project where we have 4 primary leaders, myself with the technology lead. We have an individual by the name of Will Stroll, who is our awareness lead. So his goal is to help improve awareness of the project, sharing information about what we're doing, how we're doing things. We have Peter Donker, who is our developer lead. His purpose is to kind of help with developer related things. So he's looking at developer templates and those kinds of things, where I'm looking at the technology architecture and keeping the application running. And then we also have David Poindexter, who is our strategy leader. His role is basically to kind of help us with some strategic things. Think of him as like a mini product owner. We'll come back to a little bit more why it's not exactly fair to call him a product owner, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then we also have a limited group of 5 people currently that are able to approve pull requests within our project. So We have a very wide installation base, a very large project with a fair amount of activity, but a fairly small group that is our core leadership group overall. I also have experience with other projects. There's a total of 6 ASP.NET Core utilities that I build and maintain that have been released as NuGet packages. I have 3 different projects that are suites of Azure DevOps extensions. These 2 projects alone are, used by a couple thousand people in a given month. Then we also have 15 .NET Nuke extensions or modules that we are supporting in the open source world, and then a really large number of samples, tutorials, etc., things to support other conference talks that I give, those kinds of things. So I have experience with a large project that has a lot of structure and a lot of vested interest, and then I have experience with isolated things as well. My Azure DevOps extensions may not be used by very many people, but the people that use them, they're mission critical. For example, we take care of some things with migrations for Entity Framework Core so that they actually work in a repeatable fashion for deployments. That's a feature that, we're fixing a bug that exists in Entity Framework, and the demand for that extension is pretty high, and the user base is pretty welcoming. One of the things that we determined early on with the open source project was policies and procedures become critical. You see on GitHub or anywhere else that is supporting open source projects, they talk about put a code of conduct in place and do this and do that. I cannot explain exactly how important that really becomes. If you set policies and procedures, you're going to really make it so that your effort later is going to be a lot better. You need to set your policies in stone and you need to enforce them. This is something that we've struggled with the .NET Nuke project for quite a bit. We didn't have any policies and procedures, so it was basically like what kind of mood somebody was in when we first took over the project. So one of the things that we've done is we've kind of gone through and we've looked at what do we require to create a new issue? What do we require to create a new pull request? Once you've submitted a pull request, when are we going to review it? So when we inherited the project from the prior leadership, they had a backlog of over 200 pull requests that had been collected over a period of, I believe, almost 5 years. So you would literally contribute something and you would have no idea when it was going to be reviewed, when it might be approved. So we've gone a step further and said, hey, here's what we need for you to be able to submit an issue. Here's what we need for you to submit a pull request. Now, in addition to that, here is our timeline for reviewing and approving. We can't always approve everything right away because of size, scope, effort, breaking, change, impact, those kinds of things, but we set expectations. And the idea here is to show mutual respect, right? We want our contributors to be respecting our process and respecting that we want to put a good quality product out there, but also respecting the fact that these individuals have taken time from whether it be their day job or outside of things, right, to submit something. So we should at least review it and get them some information back. We also have a code license agreement or a CLA. This is something that is part of the .NET Foundation. It's something that they really help us with, but ideally, right, what we're looking to do is we're looking to say, hey, for every contribution, we're getting an attestation from the person submitting it that they have the rights to contribute it and that they are contributing it to us with no strings attached. This is something that, especially for the larger projects over time, can become really important to make sure that you have this backstory, right? The idea behind here is we don't want to accept something from somebody today to then find out in 6 months or a year or 3 years or 5 years that that person did not have the authority to grant us that code. So again, something a little bit more important for some of the larger projects. If you're a member of the .NET Foundation, it's something literally automatic that you're able to get turned on in your process. We then also documented our review procedures, our review team, and one of the things I don't have in here as well is our versioning strategy. Our versioning and release strategy was something else that we really made sure that we documented. And the idea here is the more that we can have policies and procedures, and this is how we are operating, this is how we're doing business, the less time that we're going to spend doing management drama, dealing with questions and those kinds of things, right? Because we're managing a large .NET project. The more time that my contributors, my reviewers, everybody else spends on drama or documentation, those kinds of things, is less time that they're spending either writing code fixes that are necessary or doing other things necessary to support the project, improving our build processes, etc. So cut it off early has been something that we've really learned to be able to make life a little bit easier. The problem is it doesn't always work as we want. So you can put it all out there, but what we struggle, and we see a lot of other projects struggle with these procedures because of a couple of key things, right? Rigidity not being followed. So this is something that is a big deal for us, and we push back on it quite a bit. The most common thing is, well, it's a small change. I don't need to create an issue and document the issue and then create a pull request. My pull request is self-explanatory. We still allow certain exemptions for this, security-related items or things that are a support of our build efforts. But the idea is that every time we don't follow that structure, something else may be impeded. One of the things that some of our contributors didn't necessarily think about is we're working to move towards an automated process to build our release notes. Well, if we build our release notes based on the issues that are associated with the release, if we don't have an issue, the item doesn't get included in the release notes. So that rigidity, that process, that procedure becomes imperative. And it's something that for us as organizers, we need to make sure that we project that out to the rest of those that are using it. Misuse of administrative power. This is something that was an issue for us, but we've done a lot of things in the last year to really get better. But basically, right, the most common things is somebody's like, well, just have Mitch do it. He's an admin, right? Those of us with administrative permissions, we can bypass code review requirements. We can bypass build requirements. Any of those things that we put in our process, we can bypass. But the thing is just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And once you open that door, it becomes a really slippery slope, right? Where individuals are going to just be like, well, you did it for this issue, why won't you do it for this issue? Which then adds to the drama, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. One of the other things that we run into is an inability to programmatically enforce. So in our case, we put a 2-approver requirement on all of our pull requests because we weren't able to initially automate all of our policies and procedures. So rather than having it be one maintainer that approves something and then it gets merged in, we've expanded that out to requiring 2. It's one of our ways to kind of be a bit of a double check. We've also learned here, right, that good documentation, not only for those that are submitting, but for those that are reviewing, becomes imperative because then we can just quickly verify, hey, yep, this meets the rules. But more importantly, there are tools out there. So Mergeable is something that we're utilizing with the .NET Nuke project. We had a situation where a lot of our approvers, including myself, were forgetting to associate a milestone and an issue and a tag to every pull request before it was merged. We utilized those 2 features, right, to build out our release notes and to be able to show a milestone map of what was being done. Mergeable is an ability to add a check into a GitHub repository that basically says, hey, I can't merge, and it actually blocks you from merging, just like if your build was failing, if you're missing, for example, a milestone or any other arbitrary thing that you're looking to do based on the configuration within the project. So something really big to look at is, build the procedures, but then build a process to make sure that you can follow those procedures as much as humanly possible. And really anything that you can do to kind of force those rules, force those processes into everybody is going to make your life a lot easier as a project maintainer. The next big thing for us is commitment and focus a team. Right before this, I was talking with a couple of the other speakers of this event around one of the biggest areas that we struggle with. And we're an open source project. If you're leading an open source project, it's a lot different than what you encounter any given day as a software developer. when we're doing something for our clients, right? My team works for us. We're being paid for our work. We have a timeline, we have a schedule, we have expectations. My team has expectations of what I'm going to do for them. I have expectations of what they're going to do for me. So it's really easy to be able to kind of meet those requirements. For open source, we're getting contributions from people when they can. So getting the right focus from them on, getting people to submit, for example, bug fixes or code cleanup is a little bit harder than getting people to contribute a new shiny feature or something that's directly related to what they're working on. And we have to think about that from a procedural perspective. How do we control our releases to make sure we get a good enough balance when we don't have control and focus of the team? Which we'll kind of continue on this a little bit later. The volume of work is another big piece that kind of ties into this. Issue queue management is absolutely critical. The more issues you have in your backlog, the more assumptions that people will make, right? If you have 1,000 issues in your backlog, people may think, oh my gosh, is this project really stable? Is it worth working with? The other thing is we need to manage that issue queue in a way that we know that the only things that are still in that issue queue are valid. So for example, we utilize StaleBot to go through, and if an issue's not had any commentary or discussion in a period of, I believe it's 90 days is our current configuration, it is going to start a process to try to close it. The idea behind using something like StaleBot or otherwise to automate this queue is to ensure that as we're going through and we're releasing things, right, we may end up fixing an issue and we didn't necessarily know that we fixed an issue because it may have been related or otherwise. This allows us to kind of flag things as like, hey, if this has been around for 180 days, is this still an issue? Is this still an issue in version 9.7.0? And using some automation to help with that really works. Additionally, inside of this issue queue, it's important, and one of the things that we've changed recently is how we are managing those issues. An issue is something that is going to, we may have an idea, right, of a low risk, high risk, medium risk situation, low, medium, or high level of effort. But an issue is nothing more than an issue. We don't know what milestone it goes to. We don't know when it's going to get resolved because we don't have any developer resources assigned to it. This is one of the areas that we very recently have changed with the .NET Nuke project, as well as in all of my personal projects, is that the issue queue, the only thing we will do is say that, hey, this is something that's a major change, a minor change, a revision type. We are not doing anything here to say that, hey, this is an issue that's going to be fixed in the next version, because we don't know until we get a contribution. We may not know where it's going to go, and the negative impact that we were having before when we were assigning it to the next release was that it not only gave a visual that we have so many issues, but it gave a visual to individuals looking at the project that, well, we never get anything done. Something was set to be done in version 9.6, and then it got moved to 9.6.1, then it got moved to 9.6.2, and then it got moved to 9.7. So to the outsiders, it kind of looked like we weren't getting anything done. By simply tagging issues with this as a medium level of effort item, we kind of give a developer that's looking for a way to give back, a way to figure out what they might want to contribute to. Our pull request queue is another area of work that takes time. For us, it comes down to quality reviews are really important, but also we have to balance the time to acceptance, because if we go out and it takes us 3 hours to review a pull request, that's something, okay, so we got to balance that on our schedule. But if it takes us 3 weeks before we provide any feedback to a developer, they may not have the time or desire, right, to continue to contribute. So we've emphasized within our approver teams to try to take at least cursory looks at pull requests right away. And if we see something or see something that might need some additional change, to communicate back on a regular basis to those that are contributing, just so they know that, hey, we've received it, we're looking at it, we're looking to validate what they're trying to accomplish, rather than just letting it sit out there with no feedback, where it looks like we may be ignoring their contribution. Because the more quickly that we can embrace a pull request, even if we have to send it back for changes, the more often we're seeing those developers come back to us with additional fixes. So for that person that's net new that maybe didn't exactly do everything right, we get them some constructive feedback, but we do it quickly so that it's still top of mind on their side. And it's a whole nother thing when they send us something that's not quite right and we wait 4 weeks to review it and we're like, well, hey, we need to make these couple of changes. We may have already lost them as a contributor. As you look at the way that we operate, we've processed more than 750 pull requests in the past 12 months. I believe that number is actually closer to like 825 or so. So we can't spend, with a group of only 5 people reviewing, right? We can't spend 4 hours reviewing each pull request. We can't spend an hour reviewing each pull request. So it becomes a bit of a balance. And then we have to identify areas for testing with each of our individual releases. And then with that, our release process, the thing that I will say for everybody here is automating your release process is absolutely critical for the success of an open source project. We originally would need to do a whole bunch of manual steps, and it took us about 5 to 6 hours of manual effort to do a release. We are now able to trigger a build in Azure DevOps with 1 click. That generates what we need for the release. We do have to build the release notes, which takes a little bit of time, and we publish it to GitHub, and then we had to publish our NuGet packages out to NuGet. Our total time to do a release now is about 20 minutes, not counting the time that it takes to do release notes. So we're continuing to get better on that with our process. But the idea here is the more rapidly we can do things, right, the more time we can invest in everything else. Now, with all of this being said, the management of personal expectations of our contributors is something that we have to really look at the higher level of leadership, right? A project with no contributor is not going to be a project. However, our contributors are the most likely people to create drama and political craziness that could cause a lot of problems for us long-term as it relates to how we're going to be able to manage our project. So looking at our contributors, right? We need to look at them as individuals with a shared interest, right? They're using our project for their own purposes, right? They're also looking for some sort of recognition. Some are looking for more than others, right? Some are meeting MVP goals, some are meeting employment goals. They might need the fix for their own environment. Maybe they've already had to take a fork, that kind of thing. So what we can do as a project leader goes back to some of the things that I've already talked about, but by processing their submissions quickly or communicating why we can't process them quickly, finding a consistent way to give them recognition, and then being consistent in what we do. And I'd also add in here, right, professional communication. The more concise you can be with what you say back to the contributors, whether it is good or bad feedback, is going to be really important as you go to manage their expectations and keeping them contributing into your project. And at this same point in time, we want to start looking and watching for drama and politics, because that's one of the things that can really, really drag a project down. We also have to look at expectations from a user, right? We are leading open source projects. We're leading a team of people, but a user is somebody that's just using the project. They're either not interested or not capable of contributing to that greater good, to contributing to that project. Sometimes you can embrace them in a testing capacity, but a lot of times they're just using it. They're like, hey, this is a content management system. We need to use it. And they don't necessarily care about a lot of other things. It's their expectations that become very hard to balance, right? Even though it's open source, they're still expecting enterprise-grade solutions. They're expecting perfect security. They're expecting perfect upgrade abilities. They're wanting fixes quickly. And more importantly, they don't want to pay anything or being pressured into paying. So we see a lot of people trying to push sponsored development or those kinds of things, or even GitHub sponsors. I think personally that GitHub sponsors would be an awesome way for some of these people to give back. But I've been part of that program since the beta, and I have one sponsor. It's just not necessarily something that we're seeing from this group. We need to understand as leaders, we're not going to necessarily change their mindset. And we need to then understand how we interact with them. They also, we can continue to try to educate them a little bit on what we have going on and why we're doing what we're doing. For me, the most important thing with the users is we have to manage their expectations by managing what we promise to them and how we promise to them. This is the area, like you said, that we've changed the most in the .NET New platform in the last couple of months, couple of weeks even. The concept of roadmap. We got pressured when we took over the .NET New project from the former corporation that was running it to keep running a roadmap. Now, .NET New Corporation, when they were in charge of the open source project prior to giving it over to the community 100%, they had dedicated developers that were being compensated to develop for DNN Platform. So they would publish a roadmap and say, hey, this feature is coming and this release is coming, Q1. This is coming in Q2. And we continued that. But we really shot ourselves in the foot because we were building a roadmap that we hoped we would achieve. Now, a lot of our contributors understood that. But look at this group of people, the users that maybe don't have that technical ability. They look at it as we're not meeting our needs, we're not meeting our goals. So we've shifted from publishing a roadmap to publishing a here's what's next. And all that we're doing is linking people right into our history on GitHub of our milestones. And each of those milestones showing the things that we have in a pull request. So we've received a commitment from a user to accomplish something, makes life a lot easier. The other thing we have to look at is word choice, right? We have to really think about the way that we say what's happening, what's coming next. Are we trying to target something? Are we trying to do something here? Any type of a potential promise to these users is something that's there. I mentioned a little bit earlier, we used to tag things that we thought we would get into the next release with that particular release number. So for example, our current release right now is 9.7.0. We had hoped that we would get a new file manager component in there. So we had that issue flagged as 9.7.0. The problem is we didn't get enough contributions, enough time spent on it. So that's going to get moved to a future release. By reassigning it, it looks like we're not getting as much stuff done. So we're changing some of the words, and rather than associating in progress things, right, we're giving them a level of effort. We're not tying them to a milestone. And we're doing the same thing when we make any promises for security, for other things. Our next release, we're not committing to any particular release schedule. We have our plan that we're going forward, and we update it as we kind of go forward. And that's helped us manage things a little bit better. The other thing that we have to worry about from a technological perspective is with this disconnected group of individuals, how do we manage our technical debt and how do we manage growth? So as a large project that's been around for 15 plus years, right, we have a lot of technical debt. Don't even want to get into how much technical debt we have, but we continue to grow. Any project has to do this, right? But from an open source perspective, we have some unique challenges, right? Our resource constraints. Technical debt is never something that's looked at as a developer of like, I have nothing to do this Saturday afternoon. I'm going to go clean up some tech debt, right? It's the thing that sometimes getting your developers that you're paying to do the work a hard time, let alone those that we're not paying. The other thing is that some of that work that we may need to do requires a higher skill set than what you might have regularly available. For example, we're doing a lot of work with the technical debt in the .NET Nuke project, where we are implementing newer concepts such as dependency injection and trying to do things in the Microsoft standard way of doing things with .NET Core. That's an area that of the users in our community, we have a limited subset of people that have experience with it. So you combine that with it being less fun, less shiny, it can take a lot more time to get a commitment from individuals to be able to get that kind of things going. We also have some constraints from a user perspective that we always have to take into consideration with our technical debt and growth. In other words, we have end users that don't have technical abilities. They need to be able to upgrade, right? If we can't upgrade, we could be catastrophic to our ecosystem. There was a big push about 1.5 years ago where everybody wanted to go to .NET Core, go to .NET Core. I would still love to see a .NET Core version of DNN, but we did an analysis looking at the end user requirements, looking at the technical requirements. And what we determined is that every single installation of .NET Nuke that existed would no longer function if we upgraded to full .NET Core, because the fundamental underpinning of our framework is built on web forms. That changes the way that we do things. It's not saying that we're never going to do it, but we have to do things, right, to embrace that environment, to embrace those 500 to 700,000 installations that we have and get them to where we want to go. Now, that again may detract some of our developers because, well, they want to work on .NET Core, they want to work on MVC, so we have to balance that a little bit along the way. Release plans and support, we kind of talked about that a little bit. Roadmap and schedules can definitely help, but this is where we get into, a bit of a catch-22. We aren't publishing a roadmap that says we're doing this in Q1, this in Q2, but we are setting some roadmaps that say we are working on architecture cleanup. We're working on dependency injection support. We're letting them know what our focus areas are. So it's not even necessarily a roadmap, but it's more of a high-level schedule of concerns, but not necessarily a true timeline. We're not doing this in September. We're not doing this in October. We're emphasizing this or emphasizing that is a way that we've been able to manage that a little bit better. Security is one of the other big things that we see with open source projects that's a real struggle. Proper security response protocols is absolutely critical. The .NET Nuke platform is being used by anybody from somebody that was just looking for a cheap website that they can edit all the way up into the Department of Defense and other governmental agencies. So responding to a security concern is going to be really important. This is an area where a firm stance, a firm policy is absolutely critical and you have to stick to it. And it's not necessarily a fun fight. Limiting disclosure is absolutely critical. We, with the .NET Nuke project, limit the number of individuals that know all of the details about security issues to a very, 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 very small group of people. And we find that that has been absolutely critical because every time that we've had more people involved, one of those people sent an email to one of their people that then sent an email to another person, then all of a sudden it snowballs. Because we are, again, protecting a large installation, we looked at what Microsoft does, what other companies do, and we focus on letting people know we have this critical issue. Here's how you fix it, right? And for us, typically that policy is really move everything up. Now, aside from all of this, we can only control so much. Earlier this year, we had a security research that just went out, a security researcher that just went out and said, boom, here's a script that you can use to attack any .NET Nuke installation. Nothing I can do. I can't stop them from being able to do it, but we can at least stop that disclosure from inside, and we can have a process in place to be able to do so. And when we go through and identify, we have to really emphasize this is an issue. right? We can't just brush it under the rug. We have to go out and let people know that it's there, but we need to also not tell them exactly, well, and then click these 3 buttons. In the new project, one of our biggest detractors has been that a large number of users, for various reasons, were not upgrading to the latest versions. So, versions 6x, 7x of DNN are 5+ years old, yet there's a lot of installations still running that version in production. There's been hundreds, literally, of security fixes, some of them very, very secure, security focused, that people aren't doing. And so trying to take whatever your stance is and disclosing that to users, and then encouraging them anytime a major issue comes up to follow that procedure becomes integral. We're seeing much better success with getting folks to upgrade, but we have a huge portion of our platform that's still struggling way back. Now, the really not fun part of everything with being an open source project leader is the fact that we're most likely not psychology majors. But I will say that as we've experienced in the last couple of years, the people and the psychology of interacting with people is probably the hardest part of everything. I've already mentioned it a couple of times in expectations of contributors, expectations of end users, but it's all of these other things that are the real big detractors, right? A lot of times, the contributors that we see to open source are alpha types. There's no gender specifics that we're seeing here, but we are seeing personality types where they are proud of their accomplishments, they're confident in their abilities when they're contributing. So we are seeing more of that alpha dominant trait, which leads to very opinionated situations, and being able to be good at conflict resolution is absolutely necessary for the leadership team, because once you irritate one person, then they go and get their friends and turn everybody against everybody, and it turns nightmarish. We had a huge, huge problem with this with DNN Platform back in 2019. In all of 2019, the 4 leaders, including myself, logged about 750 hours of people management. So we're simply talking about coordinating what one person said versus another person said, trying to stop some of the political drama that was going on. In 2020, we're down to less than 150 hours. And again, right, we meet, all 4 of us meet for 1 hour, right? That's 4 hours, so it adds up fairly quickly. And what we really learned is that it was mostly related to hidden interests or hidden motivations, where we had some individuals that were trying to push some things, push some limits, push some rules, and it was all because they wanted to do something of their own. A few of the times we didn't necessarily figure out what was going on. A couple other ones we did, but really in the end, we ended up having to be very open and very public about what was going on, and this is where all of our expectations and rules come into play. And more importantly, as an open source leader, we have to think of the same things that we think of when we are running at a software development team, or really a team anywhere. There are certain people, whether they be contributors, whether they be end users, whether they be customers, whether they be paying people or not, there is a time, there is a place that you may have to fire somebody. Okay, it's hard enough to fire an employee that you're paying. It's even harder to fire somebody that you're not paying. But we had to do that as the .NET New project. We had to go out and tell a couple individuals, your services are no longer requested. You can still contribute, but we do not want you participating in our larger leadership discussions, because it was just contributing to so much of this drama. It's made our project better. Our momentum, our velocity has increased substantially since making some of those changes. And honestly, the work-life balance and overall happiness of all of our leaders has been here. This is the hardest part for a lot of us, is to understand how this all comes into play. Now, before I got up here today, I asked a couple questions on Twitter for those that might have been, interested in, some of this, any questions they had. And one of the biggest ones they had was, transitions of leadership. How do you handle it? What do you do? The .NET New platform was transitioned from open source, and I have open source in quotes because it was a company that was doing some commercial things as well as an open source platform, right? Everything was on GitHub and you could contribute, but they didn't necessarily accept the requests. And then it transitioned to open source. For us, the real transition struggle here, the tipping point for .NET Nuke, was getting the community to trust that we were actually going to accept the contributions. We'd had so many individuals that had made a change and then it sat for 3 or 5 years that they didn't believe that we would accept it. So we had to basically prove with our communication strategy, with our expectation strategies, that if you contribute it, we will review it. If it meets our standards, we will approve it. And that's been one of the biggest things, right? So it's kind of like when you pick up, any relationship or any team that you're going to have to make up for the shortcomings of anybody that was leading that project or leading that organization before you got there. It's that critical, right, for you to go out and understand why might they have been scorned, why might they have been not thinking that leadership group was being successful. So from our perspective, it just comes down to dotting those I's and crossing those T's, making sure that everybody understands, what you might be doing, why you might be doing things along the way. And with that being said, I know we don't have a ton of individuals here, but I wanted to open it up for any questions or comments that those of you that are here might have in relation to managing open source projects, interpersonal communication, things with this, navigating the .NET Foundation, any of those kinds of things. So feel free to either, just jump in here on video, audio, or share something here in the session chat. All right, we'll give everybody here just a couple of minutes, just to make sure that we don't have any stragglers. We're trying to get some questions asked. Always a little bit more interesting when we can't truly see everybody face to face. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and put my contact information back up here. Really, open source project leadership is something that is very rewarding. Being able to support a project with a wide distribution that's used by a lot of people is something that is incredibly satisfying when things go well, but it can be incredibly frustrating when you run into any type of situation or issues that are going on. And really like to thank everybody for being in attendance today or watching this after the fact. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions that you might have along the way, and I appreciate you being here.